right, in this one, let's talk about Cal Newport's Slow Productivity, The Lost Art of Accomplishment Without Burnout. I feel like this is a particularly pertinent book for today's time in general, and for myself and people like myself. We'll talk about what I mean by all of that. First, this is the second book I've read by Cal Newport. I enjoyed the other one, that one being Deep Work. This book plays off of the themes presented in Deep Work, and we could talk about that book another time. But for today, with Slow Productivity, I want to talk about how this book touches on something I find to be important, that being the current way by which we largely measure productivity based on metrics such as perceived busyness, meaning things like day-to-day task completion measured by hours spent in the office, emails responded to, little boxes checked, things that are just completed over and over again on a daily basis that don't often lead to any sort of lasting change. If the task that you've completed today is irrelevant by tomorrow, was it really worth your time and effort? And all the while that managers have increasingly used these types of metrics to monitor the productivity of the workers that they're managing in order to justify their pay, we have slowly over time diminished the importance placed on long-term goals, both at the individual level and within the overall culture itself. Because these long-term goals often do not produce visible deliverables on a daily, even weekly, even monthly, and towards the more extremes, but sometimes certainly necessary, sometimes not even on a yearly basis. So why is that important? It's because I believe that people are getting more and more burnt out with all this busy work, and people are also finding themselves in a state where they feel less fulfilled, and that may be in part, depending on your personality and your line of work, it may be in part because you don't feel like you're engaged in something meaningful, a long-term goal that actually matters. Let's talk about a couple examples. I like certain video games, but I don't have time to play video games all the time. So if I'm going to spend time on that, I want it to be something truly worthwhile for me. Think of a company like Ubisoft that is continually producing these cookie cutter games like the Assassin's Creed series, for example, where they keep taking the same game and just repurposing it over and over again, like putting a new skin on it. And it's all about trying to make quick money, versus a studio like FromSoft that spends time developing the story, the mechanics, the world, everything surrounding a game like Elden Ring, so that they can actually release a masterpiece that's going to leave a lasting impact on the culture and the video game industry overall. At the end of the day, I think it's quite obvious to to people what they actually care more about and what seems to matter more. Another thing that impacts me is this idea around music. There's a general pressure to try to get more and more music out, and that can sometimes lead to writer's block or, again, a lack of fulfillment in the artistry itself, because it doesn't feel like it's pulling from a place of value. Sometimes you just want to slow down, experience life a bit, so that you have some frame of reference to draw inspiration from when you're creating something like an album versus another 2.5 minute single that's just the same formulaic sort of song that's meant to be popular for, a month. Rather, you may feel more like you're invested in something worth your time if you're trying to create something artistic that you want to stand the test of time. So just a couple examples. He illustrates in this book some of his own examples that are of people who from the outside may look like they are living in a more laissez-faire sort of lifestyle. But if you look into their actual productivity over the course of their lives, they're some of the most productive people that are out there. Let's talk a bit more in depth about how the book's laid out. There are 5 main chapters, so it's really easy read, I would say. It's enjoyable to go through. Chapter 1, the rise and fall of pseudo-productivity. That's largely what we've been talking about so far in this video, this idea that we've been more and more over time measuring productivity based on surface level metrics like just general busyness rather than the actual value of what's being produced. And chapter 2 is called A Slower Alternative. It lays out how actually slowing down, removing these things from your day that don't actually matter and giving yourself more time to actually sit with your ideas and sit with your process, or even get outside of the process itself entirely and experience life through other avenues so that you have more inspiration to draw from, and so that new ideas can start to form in your mind. Talking about the importance of all of those things. Chapter 3 is called Do Fewer Things, and it just further expands on this idea that if you don't ever give yourself time to reflect because you're so wrapped up in being busy all the time, it's going to be hard to have novel ideas and create something that's truly worthwhile. Chapter 4 talks about working at a natural pace. It talks about working at a pace that feels right for people in general, and more specifically for yourself, rather than at this machine-like pace that's trying to produce, a certain amount of deliverables or products or emails responded to or things like that on a regular basis. A natural pace for people, it ebbs and flows. You'll have times where you're really needing to sit back and kind of gather your ideas. And he gives great examples of some really influential people who would at times gather ideas for years before finally, when it's all put together in their mind, being able to quite rapidly produce works of high value. But if you were measuring them on a daily basis based on how much it seemed like they were getting done, for so long you would have said, oh, they're not being productive at all. And if you would have, say, fired them or took away their means of actually completing their long-term goals, then we would have been robbed overall of what they ultimately were able to produce for their fields and for the culture overall. And chapter 5 is obsess over quality. I think you get the point. It talks about the relative importance of the actual quality of what you're producing, even if it takes longer to put out as compared to just this low quality, think like TikTok, all of this like media that we consume today. It's all about getting things out as quick as possible because it's not going to matter by tomorrow. So this chapter really focuses in on how we need to get back to valuing quality more, because the further we sink down this rabbit hole of dispensing with that, we're going to pay for that in the long run. But I did want to give a bit of a counterpoint for people like myself to some degree who have a bit of perfectionistic tendencies. I think it is a skill that you do need to learn and develop as you grow up and as you grow older. This ability to know when something is good enough to let go of and to put out into the world. Take, again, just speaking from what I know, music, for example, it can be quite suffocating if you lean towards having that sort of perfectionistic nature to feel like, oh, my first song or my first project needs to be absolutely perfect before I let it go. But you're never going to actually achieve that. You're never going to quite perfect anything. You're going to have diminishing returns over time. And you need to learn for you where that line is, where it's good enough to put out into the world, because in truth, what you'll come to learn is that you're actually going to grow over successive releases or over the completion of successive projects. That's where the growth in the long term is going to be seen, is from project to project. If you get too stuck on one thing for too long, you're robbing yourself of your natural trajectory of growth over time. So there's a balance to be had there. Overall, I think that this book is a great read. It's something that you could read, honestly, over a weekend or over the course of a week, and it flows well off the back of deep work and the value of that. So I think that deep work is a book that we could talk about in another video. But if you've read this book, then let me know what you think. I think it's a really valuable book for highly conscientious people who struggle with this idea of letting themselves have a bit of free time or letting themselves sit back and work on something for a while, because that anxiety can start to set in when you feel like you're not producing enough quickly enough. But it's relieving to see the examples given in this book that show if you actually will take a little bit of pressure off yourself, remove the things that don't really matter from your day-to-day life, then you will have more time to reflect and more time to really hone your own process. And that may look different for each individual person, particularly people in creative fields. You may not put out something for a while, but as long as you're still engaging in that process to some degree, even if it's just thinking about it with good effort on a regular basis, your mind is still beneath the surface working on putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And you may need that time before you're able to get back into the studio, so to speak, and really start putting it all together in a way that will be seen as by others as productive. But all the while, you know that in your own way, you were working on it the whole time. So that's Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. If you've read it, let me know. Let me know what you think about it, and I'll see you in the next one.